Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of CS Presents, a series of nearly weekly inspirational and educational webinars from creative professionals around the world. Don't forget, you can ask questions by using the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. Thank you to Creative Solutions made up of Teradek, Small HD, Wooden Camera, as well as Sigma Cine for their support of their stream. In fact, Sigma has a brand new camera that just launched today called the FPL. I encourage you to check that out. And don't forget to follow all of the brands I just mentioned on their various social channels. If you're joining us on YouTube, please make sure to click subscribe on Teradek's channel for more content exactly like this. Okay, so we have an all-star panel here today. For this session, we will be diving into the world of hostile environments, how to keep your crew safe in radioactive environments in the middle of hostile crowds, and brave the elements while still being able to get the shot. That's key. We are very lucky to be joined by three leading industry professionals, Timothy Wolfer, Kevin Garrison, and Philip Grossman, who have all traveled all over the world from Chernobyl to Cuba to Haiti to the steps of the Capitol on January 6th and beyond. They each bring a unique perspective here on this topic. So first, a couple of introductions. Me, I'm a local 600 DP and PGA producer. I have a new feature doc film that just landed on VOD called American Hossy. The doc follows a stand-up comedian from Alabama, Tushar Singh, on a comedy tour across 6 cities in India. If you like comedy, if you like travel, then you'll love this. The film also features Bill Burr and Russell Peters. Check it out if we can throw a link in the comments too. But first, I'm going to introduce Timothy Wolfer. For the last 10 years, Timothy has been producing documentaries about humanitarian aid, international development, and migration. His work has taken him to 40 countries, places like South Sudan to tell stories of the conflict, Bangladesh to cover stories of the Rohingya fleeing Myanmar, and Cuba as the country opened up to the first U.S. humanitarian assistance. Wolfer filmed and produced the feature film Adopting Haiti, shot days after the 2010 earthquake, distributed through Hulu.com. He has also produced numerous short docs for PBS stations, winning him a regional Emmy. His latest project, The Right Girls, tells the story of a group of transgender women making the journey across Mexico as part of the 2018 migrant caravan. Timothy, thank you so much for joining us. I think at this point, we're going to play a little bit of the trailer for The Right Girls. So stand by for just about 30 to 60 seconds of that trailer.
Este pueblo de esta caravana, uno somos todos y todos somos uno. Toma uno.
La discriminación se vive a diario en esta caravana para nosotros.
Ay, amor, vente ahorita. Venite, choca tu madre, hijo de puta. Mira, maricón, ponete tuyo, no ves que te estoy metiendo,
Siempre hay burlas, nos discriminan bastante en los colegios, en el trabajo.
Solo mujeres y niños, vamos para acá.
Por eso no tenemos muchas oportunidades.
Y pues busqué la caravana con ese medio para llegar a Estados Unidos, porque pienso que ahí son un poco más.
So that's just a little piece of The Right Girls, just an incredible documentary available currently basically everywhere on VOD. Moving right along to Kevin Garrison. Hi, Kevin. Thank you for joining us. Kevin is an international cinematographer based out of LA, specializing in feature films and commercials. He has filmed in over 40 countries around the world. He started his career at the age of 20, embarking on a 3-month world tour documenting human rights education in more than 10 countries, clocking in over 50,000 miles and eventually resulting in a volunteer service award from the President of the United States and numerous accolades from international dignitaries. In the past several years, he's worked on numerous national commercials for clients, including ABCmouse.com, Kendall and Kylie Jenner, Chobani, Anine Bing, the Earth Organization, Genius, Sterling Management, Beyond TV, Ticketfly, and numerous others. And I think we have just a little clip here of some of Kevin's work that we can queue up. But Kevin, thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah, absolutely. My pleasure. hopefully have a clip that I put in there, but if
Okay,
not,
yeah.
you can very easily find all of it on my Instagram. I may have been bad and not sent Michael the clip I was supposed to.
No, that's fine. That's fine. No worries. Okay, and moving along to Philip Grossman. Philip, thank you so much for joining us. Philip is an internationally recognized cinematographer, photographer, and host of Discovery Science Channel's Mysteries of the Abandoned Chernobyl's Deadly Secrets. He is one of only a few photographers to have had a solo expedition at the United Nations. His exhibition, part of the 30th anniversary remembrance of the Chernobyl catastrophe, was opened by former New Zealand Prime Minister Helen Clark and Minister of Foreign Affairs for Belarus, Vladimir Mackay. In addition, his work was selected to mark the first International Chernobyl Disaster Remembrance Day. And so you're seeing some of Philip's work right now. Philip, thank you so much for joining us. Maybe you can talk us through some of these images we've been seeing.
Yeah. So this one's actually in the basement of hospital. It's called Hospital Number 126 in Chernobyl. Anybody who saw the HBO docu-series, which I provided some technical support for, as well as some imagery. This was at the beginning of episode number 2. They talk about the firefighters have to remove their clothing. They're all radioactive, and they put them down in the basement. Well, they've been in the basement for 35 years now. So that's one of the most radioactive areas in the zone. And then I think the shot prior to that was actually in another project that I've started working on in Kazakhstan.
The space shuttle.
The space shuttle, yep. The Baikonur, in the side, the Baikonur Cosmodrome, the Buran space shuttle program, which is sort of as an extension from when I did my television show and meeting with Thomas Reed, who was a former Secretary of the Air Force and helped Reagan during the Cold War, had mentioned this KGB program. And it all sort of ties together. So actually, we're pitching a new show around that as well.
Gotcha. So we can go ahead and cut away from those images. But so I had asked you gentlemen on a previous call to talk about a moment in the field where you either had to pivot because of some safety concern that came up, or because of pre-planning, you were able to immediately use your safety plan that you had in place and execute accordingly. But I think we'll go around the room sort of one at a time here. So Kevin, why don't we start with you? Just a moment in the field where you had to pivot because of a potentially dangerous situation.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm sure everyone in this room can relate to playing with weather when filming on location in a lot of remote locales. And most recently, I've been working on a film called Nomad, which is a narrative film which takes place on all 7 continents and in 26 different countries. And we were filming on a kind of a remote island in the Faroe Islands, this place called Mykonos. And we'd been sort of keeping an eye on this tropical storm off in the ocean. And this island is only accessible by helicopter. So we had to be dropped off with all of our gear. And it was actually in one of those images you can see we're all rushing towards a helicopter. We were on our last day of filming on that island, and we got word via satellite phone from our weather service that it had banked and this hurricane was headed for the island, and they were projecting 120 mile an hour winds. And we were stuck on this island right up against a strong seawall where water was coming up about 30 feet onto the coast. And we had to call in our safety plan, which our producers had put together, which was to have a rescue helicopter fly from the main island and sort of rush out. We had to stop on the very last take of the day. Meanwhile, it's raining, the light is changing every 5 seconds and what have you. So up till the very last second, we were filming as we were running to this helicopter to get in time. And we basically landed. They strapped down the helicopter to the tarmac, knowing the weather that can exist in the Faroe Islands. And by the time we got back to base camp, it was 100 mile an hour winds. And we had to like batten down the windows and everything. It was pretty wild, but had we been stuck, it could have been a disaster. But keeping an eye on all those different elements, particularly having a production team that was experienced with working in those kind of conditions, allowed everyone to get home safely. And at the end of the day, everything was fine.
Very cool, because of pre-planning. Philip,
Yeah.
why don't we move to you next? Doesn't have to be a Chernobyl story unless you have
No,
one.
no, I've got one. We'll pivot a little bit and show where not following a plan or not having a plan can cause some issues. So we had been planning for 3 months to go to a place in Uzbekistan called Aralsk 7, which was the Soviets' chemical biological weapons factory, original biological chemical weapons factory. We'd studied satellite photos. It was what was once an island in the Aral Sea. Obviously, Aral Sea doesn't exist anymore, so it's an island, or it's now just in the desert. We had planned, sat phones. We knew we had to fly into Nukus. We got a ride up to Moynok. It took us 3 or 4 days to find a local in Moynok who could take us to this location in the desert, because it's along the Kazakhstan border, and it's sort of, because it used to be a lake and it's now dry land, they argue over where the border actually is. And most of the locals didn't want to drive up for fear of losing their vehicle. So I found a local. It's only about 100 kilometers, but took about 6 hours because you're on desert roads and desert sand dunes, and there's no cell service. So we get to the location, and when we arrive, there's nothing but smoking carcasses of old tanks and buildings. And it turns out that 4 days prior to us arriving, the Uzbek army, we believe this is the reason they did it, was trying to show the Kazakh army that they owned the land, so they blew up everything. So there was a town of about would have been about 1,200 people plus the lab facilities. So this is where we made the mistake of letting hubris get in the way and going, okay, well, we've come all this way. We know there are abandoned ships. Have you ever seen ships in the desert? That this is where it's at, because the lake, which was the second or third largest lake in the world, has now become the 14th or 15th. It's just evaporated because things the Russians had done. So we decided to set out to film the ships, to make something of this trip. Of course, the thing you always think about is don't hike in the desert during the day. So we had to make this decision, because it was about 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock. Do we set out across the desert now, or do we wait for nightfall? Well, if we wait for nightfall, we're not going to really be able to tell where we're going. I mean, we have all of our maps on our iPads and stuff, but it's really hard to navigate at night. Plus, we'll have less time when we reach the destination. It was about 15 to 20 kilometers. So we, again, let hubris get in the way and decided we were going to set out during the day. And we told our driver, meet us right back here. And there was sort of an encampment of sort of nomads that had come up to collect scrap metal. So he was going to wait for us there, or drove us up to where the border was. We said, wait for us there. So we set out hiking, and I didn't take, I wasn't planning on sleeping outside, didn't really have the right gear. I didn't calculate the water rationing enough, and finally got to our destination and shot and went to sleep that night. I actually picked up the sat phone and called my wife, just let her know everything was okay. Now, she didn't say anything until we got back, but she said she knew something was wrong when I was talking to her on the phone. And it was the point at which I thought there's some danger here. So we photographed the things we needed to. We started our hike back. I got concerned with my water rationing. So I ditched, there's a couple blue-shaped batteries, V-mount batteries, and a Manfrotto head in the desert. Just anything I could to lighten the load. Now, we were smart enough to leave water at the checkpoint where we were going to be meeting our driver. So when we got there, I was like, okay, great. So we had the water, we made it back, and then we're waiting an hour and a half, and he wasn't there. And that's when I really started to get concerned, because I had the number. One of the things you do when you plan these things is you should always have numbers of embassies and emergency contacts. And yeah, I got friends in the military, so I know I could always reach out to them in an emergency. And he wasn't there. And so we were like, okay, what are we gonna do? I said, well, even if we call the embassy, it's gonna take them a day or two to get to us, and we just don't have enough rations. So we really have to start planning. So we decided to hike another about 10 kilometers back down to where the town used to be. And he was down there. The military had been patrolling the border, and he was afraid to stay up at the border and wait for us for fear of losing his vehicle. I was never so happy to see a complete stranger in my entire life. And we had water in the car, and and of course it couldn't get any better from there. We got back down. Nukus is the city that we flew out of. It's sort of a breakaway province in Uzbekistan. They were having issues. They shut down the airport. Called the embassy. They said, yeah, this happens from time to time, but it usually doesn't last this long. So maybe you should just come to Tashkent, which is on the whole opposite side of the country. It's a 30-hour cab ride. So we decided to make a journey of it. We took 3 10-hour cab rides and sort of followed the old Silk Road. The whole cab ride was $170 US. I've had Uber rides in New York that cost me more than that.
Parking
so it's
costs more than that. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's sort of that tale of, you really have to plan. And if you can't execute the plan, be very careful about winging it. We've done this a lot, and I'm usually pretty good about it, but we just let hubris get the best of us because we'd spent so much time planning. We're sort of disappointed that the thing had fallen through and you're halfway across the world. But the flip side is, once things sort of fell in place, you've got to enjoy, it is what it is, and enjoy what you had. So we sort of turned it into a 4-day, travel journal.
Yeah, that's a great story, Philip. It's interesting how quickly equipment becomes like pounds,
Yeah.
And so I've definitely taken a memory card out of a camera, tied a camera to a tree as I'm getting bashed up against a rock wall from waves in Panama. And I said, memory card, that's enough. And then we found the camera still tied to the tree the next day. So it worked out. So
good.
Going to Timothy next. So Timothy, you were there at the Capitol on January 6th. Obviously, we all sort of know at a high level what happened that day. We also know that there was some violence directed towards journalists, freelancers like yourself. So, without going into details about who you were on assignment for that day, could you just tell me kind of your experience, and then being within the middle of a hostile crowd, for lack of a better word, and how you were able to navigate that?
Yeah, so a friend of mine that day had come to me or had texted me and said he was coming in from New York and to come on down, and we would take photos of the rally and whatever happened afterwards, and then go out for drinks afterwards. So definitely did not expect what was going to take place. So I parked my car that afternoon and walked towards the Capitol. And as soon as I got to Pennsylvania Avenue, which is kind of like the road that goes between the White House and the Capitol, there was thousands of people walking from the White House down Pennsylvania Avenue towards the Capitol on a Wednesday afternoon, and I was like, something's not quite right here. And that by the time I got to the Capitol, they were already all up on the steps, and police were trying to push them back. And so I went around to the other side of the Capitol and just started taking photos and filming and just watching what was going on. And it was kind of surreal because it was something that you never expected to see in the United States. And definitely was, talking about safety and stuff like that, definitely stood back and, filmed what was going on, and then slowly worked my way closer and closer, just kind of reading the situation and always making sure I had an escape plan in case, the violence was turned towards me.
Can you talk about, did you feel at any point that you were easily identifiable as a working journalist? You know what I mean? Or could? Yeah,
I didn't. There were a few times people kind of confronted me and were like, "What are you doing?" and stuff like that. I definitely looked like a journalist, so I had 2 camera bodies on me. All the big backpack, helmets, all the bells and whistles for doing this kind of work. And so, there were a couple of times, but then on the other hand, there would be other times that people were just ignoring the journalists. So it was it went in waves, but I was only checking, how like when you're in those kinds of moments, you're always like trying to tweet things out or Instagram or whatever, but I was only checking my phone every 30 to 40 minutes. I was definitely in the moment, keeping my eye on what was going on.
So maybe this is something that comes as you're a few years into your career, but I want to talk about the, for lack of a better word, spidey sense part of this, right? So I think when you're younger, you're kind of a little too laser focused maybe on getting the shot, but at some point you develop this intuition, and this is for all of you gentlemen, that, okay, if something feels wrong, it's probably because something's wrong, you know? So Kevin, I don't know if that relates just extreme environments for you, or maybe there's a lot of pre-planning that can come out of that, but can you talk about just the intuition side of this? Because we don't talk about it enough. I don't think safety courses in general, people like talking about enough because it's kind of a undetermined thing.
Yeah, it's ephemeral, isn't it? It's like,
sure, yeah, it's a good word
how do you even define it? And that's, that's a great point. I think it's something that comes with a lot of experience, and it's something that I definitely am still developing. I mean, I've been doing this since I was 18. I'm 28 now. And I'm still learning a lot about how to kind of read your environment. But it's a crucial skill in this field, and even recently, I was in Tunisia a few weeks ago, and Tunisia is still very locked down. It was a pretty strenuous process to get in and to shoot there, but we had to keep the crew incredibly small, and I was scouting, so it was myself, a local fixer, and a driver. And we had sort of a defined agenda and all the safety points in place, like you kind of normally would. And, our producers on the ground back in LA knew where I was supposed to be going and all that. And, perhaps in a moment of naivete or what have you, I decided to just change the plan. And I was like, hey, look, there's like this, we're on this cliffside where all these fishing boats are. It's like thousands of fishing boats. It's a super cool scene. It looks like something out of like Game of Thrones, where like all the boats would come in, like invade, but they're fishing boats, thousands of them. They're all identical, and somehow each fisherman knows which boat they're supposed to take out. And it's just this cliffside, and all down the cliffside is trash just falling down from these kind of sea shanty towns that have been built up over the years. So the whole area is a little Mad Max, it's sort of Wild West. And to your point, I could see that my fixer is a very experienced guy. He worked all throughout Africa. He's filmed in some pretty intense places. And, I could see he was just a little bit more tuned in to what was going around him, smoking a couple more cigarettes than normal, maybe, and so he was very like, not openly agitated in any way, but his behavior changed. Yeah. And I think you'd mentioned it in our previous call, but when your local fixer, your local person there's something different in their behavior, it's usually because they're uncomfortable and there's something wrong. So,
and they're not sure maybe if it's okay to say no to you because you're part of the, paying for
the
operation.
You're the person coming in and hiring them and stuff. So they want to accommodate you, and they wouldn't want to be like, hey, we're in danger, because they don't know if they are or not. And we pushed further, and we went into this shanty town, and so we're taking some photos and stuff, scouting. And I noticed that he went off and he talked to one of the locals, and then out of nowhere, he comes back around this house and he just goes, we should head out now. And I was like, oh, okay. And he goes, I just noticed some people are calling and we should go. And we get in the car and we go around this corner, and it's like this downward dirt road. And at the bottom of the road, a Jeep and this old like Datsun, like 87 Datsun, pull in and block the road. And these guys get out and start rushing towards the car and shouting in Arabic and stuff. And it was one of those moments where you're just like, this is why you listen to your senses, and what if something's just a little bit off, something's not quite right. And it turned out that it was a kind of a sensitive government zone, and they were trying to move this town, and there was a lot of contention about it because the people in that area weren't there legally according to the Tunisian law. So there was a lot of infighting happening in this area, and they'd sent in military undercover to kind of figure this all out. So these were all plainclothes military officers that were rushing the car, trying to figure out what we were doing, thinking that. So it was about a half hour of me just having no idea what's going on, going, I really hope this works out, but it could all have been avoided if we had an hour earlier. I just gone like, should we get out of here? Like this isn't that vital. You know, we can go to the main location now. So I think it's one of those things where it's tuning into the sense of when things are flowing and it all feels right, it's usually right and it feels good. And there's like, you don't have your attention sticking on anything. But the moment that you have your attention stick somewhere, it's like there's some sort of outness that's not quite right. You should listen to that. You should figure that out, and you should be really honest with yourself, because every time I haven't personally, it's resulted in some sort of situation that had to be handled later on.
Yeah, because your job is kind of twofold. You're looking for the best shot. You're sort of chasing that, but the dynamic is strange. You're not placing it. It happens all of the time, honestly. And you're right. Listen to your local fixers. The other idea about traveling with a small group versus traveling with a big group. I mean, I shot in Soweto, which was Nelson Mandela's township. And we had private security all around us, and it changes the dynamic. You're not actually capturing what this city block is like anymore when you're surrounded by private security. So it's a line that you really have to walk carefully. Philip, let's go to you next. Still maintaining that idea of spidey senses when it feels, off.
Yes. So maybe I'm a little older, I guess, than most of the guys here. I'm 51, although the boyish good looks may make me look younger. And I spent a little time in the military. So I as a teen and in college, I did the dumb things and I learned from them. And as you get older, one of the things like you said, you start to sense what's going on around. And what's most important, because a lot of the places I go, I don't speak Russian well enough to get around. But when you're in foreign countries that you don't speak the native language, you really have to include body language, and sort of understand what's going on. There's an example. We had been given permission in Chernobyl to be in there after dark. Decided we were going to go up on top of reactor number 5 because I wanted to get a shot of the sun setting behind the reactor complex. I should preface this was 4 days after the Malaysian airliner was shot down due to the war in Donetsk, which is way to the east. And got done, packed up my gear, walking through the reactor complex. It's reactors 5 and 6, which were never finished. So you're sort of feeling yourself around. I've been in there enough, but it's still sort of a maze. And as I exit the side of the building, there's flashlights in my face, guns, and people yelling at me in Russian. And usually the first thing many Americans like, well, I'm an American, they can't do it. You don't ever think that way. The first thing I did is put my hands up, and the Russian I knew said, Yana Panamayo Perutska, yo Panama Angleska, yo Panama Angleska. Which means I don't understand Russian, I understand English. Do you understand English? And it dawned in Noga, and I pointed to the camera, photographa. So they put their guns down and they walked us to the car, and the lieutenant came out in his uniform, and he's very, very nice. And you do whatever they ask. And I jokingly said, I'm gonna take my backpack off. Don't shoot me. He smiled and just goes, please. Turns out that's the only English he knew. So
these are the moments where all camera equipment being matte black, not ideal.
Yeah, no. And so they took us. So this is what's known as the SBU, which is the Ukrainian version of the KGB. And they take us back to their headquarters, and we said we were just taking photographs with my iPhone. I'm going through the iPhone showing photographs of the reactor. And then there was a photograph. I had an FS 700 at the time with an Odyssey 7Q on it. So it looked like a big commercial. And he goes, what's that? What's that? I'm like, oh, just for show. So he goes and gets the commander. And I'm like, shit. And my filming partner, like, what are we going to do? Well, we have to show him something. So I grabbed the Odyssey 7Q, grabbed a GH3, I guess at the time, and sort of said, this is what I had. They didn't know the Odyssey was a recorder. They just knew the camera. So I had to go through all the photos on the camera and delete anything of the reactor. And I said, I can delete it all. And they're like, no, just reactor. So we sat there for like 40 minutes going through photo for photo for photo. But in those situations, you look around the room, what are they, you know fast movements, answer questions yes and no. Whatever they ask you to do, you do it. Don't argue with them. And in most cases, they were very, very nice about it, which, they were concerned because there is still radioactive material there. They don't want terrorists and all this. I've got thousands of photos of the reactor. I don't know why this particular time they made an issue of it, but wasn't going to ask any questions. And you just learn hey, whatever they're going to tell you to do, you do, and you just be quiet about it.
Yeah, and at one point, Philip, I think, being a journalist, being an American journalist, you had a teeny bit of a shield around you to some extent, in the sense that the State Department very protective of that job classification.
Yeah.
But in the moment, it's like,
yep, that helped a lot in Japan when we were in Fukushima, because they're very worried about getting a bad reputation. It's not quite the same in Ukraine, although you're right, there is a little bit of a shield because they don't want this. Yeah, this episode, of course, when we went to Kazakhstan, my friend reminded me that because this is technically Russian territory and you're an American. So that was a little bit different, but yeah.
Yeah, and also there's the idea in certain countries where the media is so tightly, the internal media is so tightly controlled that images and video can be weaponized in a way that in some Western countries, we don't think of it like that necessarily. We think we're doing our job. They're looking at what you're doing is perhaps equally as dangerous.
Yeah, I mean, just recently in this return trip, the day after I had posted an image, not even think, because we're not used to military government spying on you in the United States. I got a phone call at about 4:30 in the morning. I got 4 or 5 phone calls at 4:30 in the morning from friends in Ukraine, and then the SBU about an image, and it caused quite a kerfuffle, and we got it all straightened out. But it's one of those things that there's one time I went to Belarus, and we had gotten journalists. They had filled out all the paperwork, and we were there as part of the Minister of Foreign Affairs. And they hand me my journalist pass, and it's got my photograph on it from LinkedIn. I never sent them that photo.
Yeah, no kidding.
They went and got it. So you really got to. Foreign governments are not like the U.S. They do keep an eye on who's coming and going.
Absolutely. And what we're all kind of alluding to here, if you're listening, is understand to some degree the geopolitics of what you're getting into. Know who the bad guys are, who the good guys are, but there's nuance there. It's not black and white anymore, but understand kind of what you're walking into, which leads you to the ability, Timothy, to be able to assess risk. Is this trip worth it? Does this meet my threshold for I can get, do good work? In the case of Timothy, I know you've shot in Cuba, which I normally, my experience there, I would have thought that would have been a okay situation. I thought I kind of knew the risks. I was in the consulate, and then about a year later, that consulate had some sort of sonic attack happen at it, and all of those diplomats still have headaches and nausea based on walking into this consulate in Havana. It's kind of a famous instance of me thinking this was fine territory and it ending up being a little stranger because of the political side of it, right? Canadians walking around everywhere in Havana, it's fine. They don't care, but you're an American citizen. It means different things in different parts of the world. Now, Timothy, you don't have to talk about Cuba specifically, but how do you assess risk?
One of the things is like I take that in two folds, right? So there's a risk tolerance that I have, but then there's also a risk tolerance that my teammates might have, or the subjects that I'm working with might have, and how does that affect them as well? I'll give you an example of one area where I totally messed up when I was very early on. I was in Egypt, and we're stuck in traffic, and I'm in a taxi cab, and there's some kind of protest going on. This was just a couple of years after the Arab Spring. And, being the young person who's willing to do anything, I obviously jump out of the taxi cab and go running towards the protest to get some B-roll, which isn't even crucial to the story I was trying to tell. But, when I got back to the car, we're still stuck in a traffic jam, which is not a good situation to be. And, the taxi cab driver was very angry at me, rightfully so, as he should have been. And it just kind of was like a hard lesson to learn of, I've got to be thinking about the other people on my team and stuff, and to kind of bring it around to the right girls. When I was filming that film, so we're in Mexico, and there's a bunch of anti-migrant protests going on by Mexican citizens towards the migrants coming out of Central America. And 2 of my subjects ended up at these protests. And I had to make the hard decision to to distance myself from them, because as an international journalist, I bring a lot of attention to what I'm doing and could then bring a lot of attention to these women. And so, you know, it would have been some powerful images, but the decision just in the moment had to be made that it just was not worth it for their own safety, because you don't want to be doing harm.
Well, let's talk about some of the, I guess, subtext there of what you were talking about, Timothy, in the sense that you're hopping out of the cab, running towards this crowd. So there's this idea in this industry, I mentioned this on the previous discussion with you gentlemen, but just set it up for everybody else, that it's such a hard industry to break into. You're in your 20s, maybe you're on your third job, you're super excited. Kevin's still in his 20s, so maybe he feels like this right now. And you're the first one to sort of raise your hand and go into a situation that you maybe don't fully understand because you think there's someone in the wings waiting to take your job. Maybe that was just me in my early 20s, but Kevin, do you think you can maybe speak to that a little bit? The idea of volunteering for the dangerous thing because you want to impress people you think are going to continue to hire you versus knowing enough, having enough confidence in that moment to say no.
Yeah, absolutely. It's tough. I mean, it's a tough line to draw. And I think ultimately, you know, we kind of brought this up even in our last call as well, but I tend to be more flippant with my own safety than perhaps the safety of others. And I think that's an easy line to draw, is like, I'm never going to do anything which puts myself or the other crew at risk, like as a whole. It's very easy to be mindful of other people's safety, but sometimes your own safety is not your first consideration. Particularly, I know for myself, starting out early, and you know, it's something that you're constantly updating. Is what's your risk factor that you're willing to take? And I think yes, with experience, perhaps that threshold comes lower, but there's something kind of inherent in doing this job and traveling to places and working in these exotic locales that there's going to be some level of risk, and it's making that assessment for yourself. And to answer Jay's question as well, doing your preparation in advance and seeing what the risk is going to be, you know, and that means studying up in advance on the location and the people that you're going to be working with, knowing the reputation of your local production companies or fixers that you're going to be working with, talking to them in advance, you know, jump on Skype and say, hey, what's going on in that area? Checking the local news stories in advance. You know, there was, on my way to Tunisia, there was a terrorist attack the day that I got there and I started my quarantine, and we had to change our whole route because of this attack in the Chami Mountains. So we had to adjust our whole route, and our fixers were very quick to respond to that and make adjustments. And, you know, there's always going to be some level of risk to anywhere that you're filming, but I think that you have to be maybe more stringent with yourself, because that's the hardest person to think of. You're always like, yeah, I want to get the shot. I want to get this. And I want to be the guy who you go to and I can get it done no matter what. And there's a lot of value in that. And that's a cool thing to be able to do, but you're not going to be that guy for long if an accident happens. And that's the thing, is if you want to do this career for a long time, you have to be really good about managing your limitations, your safety, and the safety of those around you. And that means like tuning into things, doing your research in advance, and being really, really mindful of it so that you can make split-second decisions on the ground that are informed. Because without the information, you may not know if you're going to offend someone in their local customs. Like, that's a big deal. Like, if you offend somebody, that could be the difference between you're going to jail or not. And that's the truth of it. And if you can be respectful in a way, and sometimes that's knowing a little bit of the local language, sometimes that's knowing a local custom. If you're at least making an effort, sometimes that's enough. It's just showing that you're granting importance to the person on the other end of that interaction. And that takes some research.
Absolutely. And Jay from Boston, we're going to continue to answer that question honestly for the next 20 plus minutes. So stand by. And what Kevin's talking about is something very important. It's leading from the front, but leading from the front when you have the correct information too. So be wary of shows that you're on where they're asking you to climb up the side of the mountain and get a little closer to the edge, but they're back there in the van. So be careful of that with your own internal team as well. So Philip, I know in service of the story, that's kind of a motto of yours that you've said a couple of times to me. So is that your personal check? Okay, fine. If I go do this thing, will it serve the story in a positive light, and therefore the risk, is worth it?
Yeah. So, I'm a private pilot. So one of the things you learn as a private pilot is just what are your minimums? Maybe that, there's the 1,000-foot minimum cloud coverage, and, I'm an instrument rated, so that's fine. But I may say, well, I'm not going to go out unless it's at least 2,000. You got to know what your personal minimums are. And that's sort of where I look at it from a perspective of the story. Is what I'm going to do going to help tell the story? And then you have to weigh the value of what it is. Hanging off the side of a cliff with, 2 pinkies to get a shot of a bird that's B-roll, probably not a lot of value to the story. So you've got to, and there's no right or wrong equation for it, and how you're going to do that calculus, but you have to have your own personal calculus, and you occasionally you have to be able to say no. As an example, we were in Kursk, Russia. We had made the trek there to try and film, and one of the things, we always try and get permission first. That's the first and foremost, because you get better access if you ask. Occasionally, you'll get a no, and I want to go. So then it's personal. It's my own thing, and I'm not going to take a whole crew with me. I may, have another shooter who's a friend of mine. We were in Kursk, and we wanted to go to reactor number 5. It was abandoned. Kursk is identical to Chernobyl. It was part of the bigger story to sort of tell, the similarities between the two. And we got there, and we the access that we thought we were going to look at, we looked over the fence. They had removed all the grass. It was all sand. It had all been raked. We realized that was so they could see if someone's feet had walked across the sand, so they could track you that way. So we said, okay, we can't access that way. So we spent an hour or two, going around the facility, and there was a connecting building. We said, well, we can get into that connecting building and then go. And just as we're getting ready to go, I said, well, wait a second. I pull out, I have a thermal scope, looked in the building, and I saw at that time there's about 6 or 7 people. It's an abandoned building, the windows knocked out. And eventually it was about 12 or 15 people. It turned out that it was the sort of like the Special Forces police was using that facility for training. Of course, we always say they knew we were coming, and that's why they were there. But the reality is that we just think that it was just, unfortunate that they were using that facility. And we just said, we're not going to be able to go. We had one day to make this trip, and we said, nope, it's not worth the risk to tell the story. So we'll get some photographs outside. And even doing that, we wound up getting chased by security. But we said, that's our personal minimum. It's not worth going to jail for that part of the story. And the funny thing is, the vehicle that these police go in, the acronym on the side of the vehicle is spelled out in Russian, looks like the word omen. So I said, well, maybe that was exactly.
Yeah, know when to say no. That might take you a decade, but if you have one takeaway from this panel, that's a good one. So we are here because of 4 great equipment manufacturers. I want to talk about preparation when it comes to equipment, just building your rig. Just what should that look like? Because when you're at a certain point in your career, you're lucky enough to have access to anything you want. You can build up the camera any possible way. Usually flashy is not the answer. But Timothy, we'll go to you next. But so behind me, I actually have a Canon C300 Mark III, and it's a pared down wooden camera rig, right? I don't have shoulder, stuff here. I don't have a follow focus. To me, this is the kind of package that I like for documentary shooting. But you can absolutely get smaller than this with cameras like the Sigma FP and the newer Sigma FPL. Timothy, can we talk about preparation as it equates to equipment?
Yeah, so for me, it's all about the smaller the better. Most recently, I've been shooting a lot on the A7R III. Really love that camera. And then I have a really good audio package also for it, because I'm shooting journalism, I'm shooting documentaries. So I have a MKH 416 that's built into one of the audio adapters on the camera. But I think also in preparation, taking 2 of everything. I'm always trying to think about where could something fail, because in harsh environments, things get dropped, things get broken. And so just always having, a second body on me, having 2 sets of lenses, 2 sets of mics, just everything possible that I can take 2 of. And then also,
Redundancy, yeah.
because a lot of times you have to go out very quickly for a lot of this kind of work. You're called up and you've got to move. Just trying to have everything, where it is, it's all packed and just ready to rock and roll, that if I did have to leave out the door in the next 20 minutes, I could.
Yeah, all good thoughts. Kevin, I have a question for you that relates to equipment. Brad from YouTube is asking, do you have any recommendations for shooting in remote areas in jungles and deserts? I mean, remote areas, obviously you're the guy for that. Will likely have zero access to power, even generators, worried about charging batteries and media management. What do? You bring 35 cards? What's the answer?
I mean, that's one thing. Yeah, I mean, there's the 2 ways to approach it are excess and then paring it down. So you can bring enough batteries so that you never have to charge anything. And I've definitely done that because there was just no chance that we were going to be able to charge. So you bring enough batteries to last you the entire length of time. But more efficient and probably better for your long-term survival is to figure out what you really need. So on Nomad, we had our main production package, which traveled in 33 Pelican cases, the big Pelican cases. So we arrived to the airport, it looked like a military transport. And it was, massive. It was a massive operation for a lot of the locations we were going to where we would have support on the ground. But whenever it would go remote, we had our C, B, A packages, and they would get progressively smaller and smaller until we finally, when we were filming in Antarctica, it was like I was the DP and AC, and we every single person there was wearing 5 different hats for that post. So it was our producer was doing hair and makeup and sound, and it was was learning from our makeup artist how to do it because we could only get so many people to Antarctica. So we managed to pare our camera package down from 8 huge f-stop bags, the big boys, down to 1 that we would go to shore with. And it's all about finding what is the highest level of technical expertise that you can reach to communicate your message effectively, and don't exceed that. So when we were in Rio, we went into some areas that were a little bit sketchier, and we, instead of shooting on a mini LF with our huge lenses and all of that, it was just an A7S, and I had a signature prime on the front, but I wrapped a bandana around it and would just kind of hold it like this going through these streets. And it's, you're not invisible, you're still a white guy running around in a blazer. It's not obvious, but it's a lot less intrusive than having a huge camera rig on your shoulder. So
and you might already have captured the moment by the time they notice you. They're going to notice
exactly.
You might already have the shot. Mm-hmm.
You want to be elusive enough to get what you need, and not attract unwanted attention in a way. So you just pare it down as much as you possibly can, and sometimes you exceed it. And you don't have everything you need, and you learn from that. But until you kind of push yourself to go as light as possible with as little as possible, you can't really find out what you need. It's that time where you're going I really wish I had another battery. And then you're cool, I'll always bring 4 batteries from now on. That's something I can't live without.
So Philip, we're going to go to you next with the preparing from a rig situation, but I just want to make the point too that sometimes the equipment is doing different things than it's designed for, in the sense that I had a small HD 502 in front of my eyes. We set off a practical, not me, set off a practical explosion about 100 feet away, and aluminum shrapnel landed everywhere without naming names. This was a major production. You'd think the planning would have been in place. I was very angry at the
trip. I carried 3 V mounts with me, 150 watt hour, and had to turn the camera on and off just to sort of, make sure I wasn't using too much. And, anybody who's ever shot red knows the mags are pretty expensive. So I only had 2 mags, and you really start to minimize what you're going to shoot. And so most recently, I've switched to Komodo. You can switch back to my camera, and it's sort of a game changer for me. It's super tiny. It's a little bright, but that's, the color's actually Jared named after me. It's called Grossman Gold, but it uses standard batteries. In Chernobyl, this last trip, which was where I was really testing this, 2 970s on the rig and 1 970 on the monitor lasted me almost an entire day of shooting, and 3 cards. So that's a game changer in terms of the number of batteries I have to take. And then because they're smaller, I can carry, what amounts to iPhone chargers, battery bricks that are USB-C, and there's several manufacturers now making chargers. So I can take those with me as well. And they're thin enough and they slide in bags. And so it's all about testing the gear, figuring out what fits in the smallest space available. I always want to take 2 of everything, but you really can't. So I try to figure out how can I do double duty with lenses, and the new RF mount to EF mount with the focal reducer now allows me to take a single, 105, 24 to 105 Canon lens, and it gives me, a 17 to 72 f2.8. But then I take the focal reducer off and I've got the 24 to 1. So now it's a single lens that can do double duty for me. So it's really kind of testing those things. The biggest issue is, especially when you're out and about, is dumping cards. How do you dump cards, and can you take enough? And if you're shooting SD cards, just buy SD cards, buy a lot of them. They're cheap. My R5 is like that. But, the Komodo or the Red, anyone's using CF, CFast, CF Express, they're expensive cards, and so you're not going to have hundreds of them. Rent them. Renting is great. That's what I do a lot of times when there's a specific lens that I don't need to own. Rent. There's a lot of places that rent stuff, which is really good. And I've looked at using my iPad to do offload. Not quite there yet. The iPad Pro just does it. The software's there, but the speed is not there. It's a single channel USB. The NAR box is pretty good. So I think that's sort of my next solution, because I have the really small, maybe G Technology and Samsung now has really small little USB-C 4 terabyte drives, and use the NAR box just to read the cards and spit it out on the other drive. So there are solutions, but the key is practice before you go. Do not get out in the field thinking you know how this stuff works. I would never have taken the Komodo to Chernobyl. It was the first time I was going to Chernobyl. It just, I knew what I was shooting and how to shoot. It was a great environment for me. I had tried testing it this summer, driving across country, which was great, but it's not the same thing. You can always pull over the side of the road if you forgot a battery. You can't do that there. So test the gear, test how you think you're going to use it, know the menus on the gear. I mean, that's one of the biggest things, is because sometimes you got to quickly go through menus to reset or change things based on what you're shooting. And if you don't know where those things are, that slows you down. You can miss a shot.
Yeah, and I mean, obviously, testing is super key, and this is, I think, why Creative Solutions opens up offices in Los Angeles. There's one in Burbank. I don't know if they're still in the you need to call ahead to demo, but they have every possible kind of wooden camera rig at Creative Solutions in Burbank. So I mean, that's a great place to test. And then a lot of rental houses too have CS stuff. So I'm sure you can walk in there and be like, can I just try this out for a second? And that's an easy way to sort of test things. So we might go a little long here, gentlemen. I hope that's okay. Just maybe 10 or so minutes. I'm running a little behind on some questions. But Timothy, we're going to go to you next. I want to bang through a bunch of questions here. So 1 or 2 sentence answers if we can. If we can go a little longer, that's fine too. So Sangeeta Valan asks, I'm sorry if I messed up the first name there. How did you start your career at the very beginning? Oh, how do you start your career at the very beginning in this environment? Yeah, I mean, maybe I'll start us off there. With COVID, this is a very hard time, right, Timothy? I don't know if you're feeling like you're working with your close freelance colleagues because you trust them, you know they're not going to parties on weekends. That's sort of how I feel. I do very much feel like I've moved to kind of my inner circle, and I'm not as willing to take risks on a second circle of in terms of new people in a network. So it is a hard time to break into the industry. Timothy, do you agree with that? Do you have a different sort of take?
Yeah, I think COVID is a hard time to break into the industry, and I definitely know that I personally have not been shooting quite as much during this time, but I think things are going to change soon. And for anyone looking to break into the industry, I would simply say just show up. That's the number one thing if you want to buy a plane ticket somewhere and just go start shooting and networking that way. I think that's the best way in, to be honest.
Yeah, I agree. Continue to be a competent individual who executes, on a day-to-day basis, even on a small level, then a bigger level, then finally, you're on the top. Kevin, let's go to you with this. Patrick Tresh asks, ideally, should you blend into the area you want to film? How do you achieve that? And then Patrick goes on to say that
Yeah, I read 30
you saw the
people
whole
with
thing.
Kalashnikov for protection.
Yeah, and
that's going to be difficult to blend in.
Yeah, and I realize actually too that I've been using the term fixer. We've all been using the term fixer. There's some questions about that. So what is a fixer? A fixer is a local person who ideally has some production experience, who knows the best angle for the wide shot of town, knows what's dangerous, knows where to get the best meatball sandwich in Istanbul, or what have you. So that's what a fixer is, a little bit of a catch-all term, kind of like producer is. So Kevin, you Patrick's question. So he has the option of going a big caravan with 30 armed individuals. Let's talk about.
Yeah, I mean, if that option exists, it probably sounds like a good idea. So, I mean, it depends on where you're going. Sure. And honestly, I can't see many places where 30 military guys with Kalashnikovs is going to blend in very well. But, I think that's something where you have to look at the story that you're telling, and you have to decide if blending in is a part of that. It may not be. I mean, at the end of the day, when we film in places where we filmed in very remote villages in Africa with the Hadzabe, where it's like, you're not going to blend in. You just have to kind of embrace the fact that you are a foreigner and try to learn, try to be as respectful as possible. I mean, you can always have a conversation beforehand about like, hey guys, like, I want you to be with me, but like, maybe let's not intimidate the locals that we're trying to work with. And, we had armed security in Egypt and quite a few places around the world. And we had them, it's like, hey, stay close, but kind of hang back so that we can interact, and, just keep your eyes on me so that you're still doing your job, and like all the risk is like managed, but, stay in like rescue me distance, but don't be breathing down my neck. So I think you have to have that conversation. I mean, that's a big question, and it sounds like a really cool project, but I don't know that that's something where you need to blend in necessarily.
Just if that's the only way to execute, make the 30 people part of the story. Then the journey becomes part of your story. I don't know if the creative leads to that, but that is probably the only way, where you won't just have people wandering through every single shot. So Philip, we'll go to you and Timothy next here, but I'm going to actually tackle this question. The AMP10 from YouTube asks, any advice for camera women filming in foreign countries, especially those in the Middle East that treat women differently than we do in the States? The only thing I will say on this is I film with my wife, Rin, quite often, and we have had experiences in Mongolia and in South Korea where she is being treated differently, where people on her crew that technically would be below her, right, if we're looking at credits. And I think the best thing that you can do is just try to be an ally in those situations. But perhaps, if I'm producing that project, I try not to just put my thumb into the middle of it. That is also an interaction that they need to work out to some extent. But all you can do is be an ally, I think, in those situations. Be generally supportive. Make the lines of communication very clear that I am talking to her, and then she is talking to you, and then you should execute on whatever that is. So,
and I'd add to that, because my wife's gone with me on several of these trips as well, and you're in somebody else's culture. If they don't want to talk to a female, they're not going to talk to a female. So what you need to do is figure out how. You're not going to change the way they do things. So it's better to find a way. If you know that, well, he'll talk to that person, then you have to talk to that person. That's your ally to communicate, to get what needs to be done. As much as we wish everything was like it is in our country, or, or there was, kumbaya, it's not that way. And so you just have to figure out
to make it
right.
Yeah.
Right. You just have to figure out, first and foremost, be safe. You want to be safe. And then figure out how to work within the bounding conditions that are presented to you. If they only talk to males, then find that male on your group, and don't take it personally that, oh my God, I'm the one who's in charge and that person works for me. How can they talk? just go, okay, this is what I need to do to get this done.
Yeah, it's not your job to change the local culture. So this is actually a question from John Dabrowski specifically for Timothy. How do you handle people asking, what are you filming, particularly when you're filming in places where there are two clashing sides? Timothy, take that in whichever direction you want, but are you just upfront, like, I'm here for this?
Yeah, totally. I think that there is an integrity thing there. You just got to be straightforward with what your intentions are, and that you are a journalist, and that you're either there to be unbiased, or whatever the story you're trying to tell is. Just to be upfront with them, and yeah, usually people are pretty understanding and respectful of that. Just to add real quick to what Kevin was talking about,
Please.
safety-wise, I think that one of the things about safety is building good relationships. And I think that a lot of that can be as little as just making eye contact with whatever person you're filming, or having a quick conversation beforehand if you are in like a public area, and just trying to navigate those social dynamics in the moment, I think is one of the strongest things for keeping you safe, because now you've got somebody that potentially could vouch for you and stuff if things did go awry.
Yeah, and I want to make a distinction here too, that things are a little different between the scripted narrative world and documentary. So in documentary, I think what you're hearing from the group here is that soft skills are suddenly much more important than they would be in scripted, where you have a first AD, et cetera, et cetera. Although I will say that yesterday, I think it was, a condor fell on a house in Los Angeles on a large streamer project. So because of high winds. So safety courses tend to be correct operation of condors and less of the stuff that we're talking about here today. So equally valuable. I find that a lot of my documentary abilities end up working great in scripted. I don't know if all of you feel the same. We end up making our day on the commercial with like time to spare, and then other people are worrying about the highlights for another 2 or 3 hours on a particular shot. So John Dabrowski has another, I do want a kind of a quick answer from each of you on this. This goes into, how do you say no? So John Dabrowski is a specific instance here that he's referencing, but also as DPs, have you ever had to deal with producers who are pushing you to do something that you don't feel is safe? How do you handle it? I think it's similar, not just for the DP job title, but let's go around the room saying no in the correct way to a superior. So Philip, why don't we go with you first? So you're being told to do something. I know you're on your own a lot and you're often the boss. So
yeah. So I'm fortunate enough that most of my stuff is where I'm the boss, so I get to say no to myself. But in the few instances where somebody's asked me to do something, I'm just straightforward and go, this is too dangerous, and try to explain why, and that you're not going to do it. Don't, if it's like, well, maybe I don't know. If you do that, they're going to push you. If you go, nope, this is too dangerous, it's outside of my comfort zone, I'm not going to do it. And then you just have to be willing to take the repercussions. It may be, okay, then you're off the job. I would hope that the director or producers are not those kind of people, that they would take into account who you are and what you do, and go, okay, well, or work with them to say, here's the way I could get that shot, or get the essence of whatever they're trying to do.
Yes. What are you trying to do with this moment? Can we find a safe way to make it happen? The dramatic Hollywood way, the DP wearing your beret, just no. And that's not the context you need.
Yeah, exactly.
I do get a little grumpy when like someone else in my department is being asked to do a dangerous thing. That's when you'll see, Graham teeth come out. So Kevin, do you have another take on saying no in a way that maybe doesn't get you fired? Maybe.
Yeah. I mean, that's a good goal. I've been very fortunate to work with mostly production teams that are pretty experienced in this world and do things safely. But in the few occasions where I've been outside of that zone, it's a communication point. It's just like, hey, look, I love this project. I love you. I want to make your thing happen. This freaks me out, for this reason, and this reason. Yep. And it's not that I don't want to get the shot. I want that shot. I can see it. It's beautiful in my mind, but I don't want to hang off of the side of that building right now, without the proper crew to rig that. Now, if we want to get a rigging crew in that's super experienced in that, like, I'll hang off the building. Absolutely. That's fine. Yeah. So I think it's just having a really honest and like real discussion with the other person. It's like, and not in a challenging way, like not being like,
Yeah.
no, and you're a jerk for asking, because they may just not know that what they're asking you to do is unsafe. So
Usually that's the case. They just don't know.
It's not from a bad place at all. It's and you know, I think the other thing is it's much easier to do that again for someone who is working for you. You're like, no, I'm not going to put my guys through that because it's not safe for this, this, and this. But when it's yourself, there's a little more tact involved to do it in a way that's diplomatic, and that's so important. Whether more in the documentary world or maybe even more so in the narrative, where you're working with more people, is to maintain that diplomacy and explain why without coming off as like a jerk, but being really firm in your viewpoint.
Yeah, and I mean, this is like basic negotiation skills. Understand what the other side wants. Do they want an ego hit, or do they want a wide shot of the city? Like, understand where they're coming from, and then you have a somewhere where you can hopefully meet in the middle, or not at all. Timothy, do you have anything to add to that? I mean, it's pretty well covered, but what do you think?
Yeah, I think having a conversation before you even get to a production is a big thing, and just make sure that you're on the same page, just that pre-planning, so that those kinds of conflicts don't arise. I think that's a big part of it.
That's a great point. Knowing when those moments might show up, already understanding each other's thresholds, what have you. One of the things about documentary that is tricky, Kevin, is when you see the row of boats that looks like Game of Thrones and you want to go get that shot, you do need to leave yourself open for the 5% of moments where it's like the light is hitting the water and it's just, it's life-changing stuff, but then still listening to your spidey senses if it's not a great, great idea.
And sometimes it's painful and it feels like a little bit of a loss, but it's one of those things where you go like, but there will be other things, and that's okay.
Yes. And you're going to live to have a long career. Yeah.
And some of us, you have your wife's voice in the back of your head going, don't do anything stupid. Okay, is this what she was talking about? Yeah, okay.
Specifically.
I got a question for all you guys. How many people have missed golden hour because of like a security, you have to get back to somewhere, and so you constantly can't shoot?
4 times.
Oh, I mean,
that I remember painfully.
You know, the water, the orange glow is like setting behind some story element that's super key, like a plant, you know, and there's steam coming out of it, or what? Yeah. I mean, like a coal plant or something, and you're doing a climate thing. Yeah, that always happens.
It hurts.
Okay, another few quick questions here. Have any of you done a hostile environment course in the UK? If you're doing this sort of work for a major broadcaster, it's usually a requirement. So I have done BBC projects. It's absolutely a requirement. BBC, I think who you're referencing, is very good at this. They're like, okay, your on-camera talent's pulled into a van. Their phone is with them. What do you do? BBC, for whatever reason, is excellent with this. I can't speak to all networks. Has anyone else done hostile training sort of situations?
I haven't done it as part of a project, but I happen to do survival skills and those kind of things. So I've been in those type of environments. In fact, one of the things I'm working on right now is getting my EMT certification, paramedic certification. So I have that knowledge when I'm out in the field for myself or with somebody else. And I would say one thing I don't know if we've talked about, especially in smaller crews, is first aid and just having the basics with you. I'll tell you, a small tube of crazy glue is amazing. That's effectively what surgical adhesive is. If you can't get a hold of it, that will help you in a pinch. You can now get, the little staplers, the disposable ones. I carry that with me. I carry a lot of those little things in a small pack just in case, because you never know. I hope I never have to use it, but if I do, it's there.
And that everything becomes so micro when you're on project like this, in the sense you have room for a memory card or crazy glue, and these are the kinds of equations suddenly you're having to deal with on projects like this. Gentlemen, that's about at time for us. Thank you so much. This was a fascinating conversation for me, and I hope people took some good stuff away from this.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys. All right, so I'm going to do a quick wrap up here. Thanks again to Creative Solutions and Sigma Cine USA for helping to make this event possible. Go to cs.inc to sign up for upcoming webinars, be a part of the live audience for Q&A sessions. We also had a bunch of great questions, very specific questions today, so thank you for that. You can also enjoy past conversations on Teradek's YouTube. We have another CS Presents stream coming up on April 29th. Set your calendars at 10 a.m. PST about handling color in the field and in post. It's sort of everything you want to be talking about in terms of color, maintaining the vision of the DP all the way through to the end. the job role with DIT is in flux all the time. So we're going to go into all of that. Keep an eye out for that Eventbrite. If you're on the mailing list for the CS team, you probably are going to get that Eventbrite. And a friendly reminder, again, please subscribe to Teradx YouTube to catch past sessions. Thanks again, everyone. Stay safe, stay healthy. Have a good rest of your day.
Thank you.
Everybody.